Iranian Americans for Liberty released this statement condemning the Iranian-backed malicious assassination attempt. Joining us now, the executive director of Iranian Americans for Liberty and Newsmax insider, Brian Leib. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Now, under President Trump, sanctions in Iran were at their highest, with his maximum pressure campaign working. Now, during this week, you have the Biden White House effectively trying to re-enter the Iran deal. Iran's stockpile of cash has skyrocketed from $4 billion to $31 billion, and the IMF projects it to increase to almost $43 billion by this time next year. This number could have been even as higher if the U.S. does re-enter that Iran nuclear deal. So how do we actually get through this when the Biden administration doesn't seem to understand the threat Iran poses to our nation, or actually the instability it proposes for the entire region?
Joe, thanks for having me on. It's good to see you again. Listen, it's very clear, what the Iranian regime is doing inside of Iran, throughout the region, whether it's funding terrorists all throughout the world, whether it's funding militias in Iraq, that are ultimately trying to assassinate a prime minister. The Iranian regime, Joe, they haven't changed their tune once since 1979. It's death to America. It's death to Israel, while funding terrorism all around the world, while censoring, oppressing, and murdering their own citizens who speak out against their oppressive tactics as a government. Listen, I'm not surprised. Okay, Joe, I'm not surprised that under President Biden's leadership, that they've grown from $4 billion in cash reserves to now over $30 billion. And while $4 billion sounds like a lot of money to you and to me and to your viewers, $4 billion to a sovereign nation like the Islamic Republic of Iran was getting down to the bare nubs. They were close to bankruptcy as a nation. And now, as you just mentioned, based on Adam Credo's report at the Free Beacon, now we're hearing that they have almost $30 billion in cash reserves. $30 billion in cash reserves means there's going to be more terrorist attacks around the world, and that the Iranian regime is going to be even more emboldened. So the Republicans in the House and the Senate need to continue making a lot of noise on this issue, need to keep holding President Biden and his administration accountable for their weakness and for appeasing terrorists in Iran.
Absolutely. I think whether you're talking about business or whether you're talking about diplomacy, we know all negotiations start with leverage. Without leverage, you likely won't get far. Has the Biden administration effectively given away our leverage in the region? You have Iran, again, allowing that $400 million alliance to be formed with the Chinese government. Again, you have an Ayatollah that doesn't believe that America should exist, that has called Israel a military base. Should not be a surprise, while you end up having Hezbollah basically working at the behest of the Ayatollah, causing havoc in the region. Basically a recognized organization by day, a terrorist organization by night. How do we make heads or tails of this?
Well, Joe, we've lost all leverage. I mean, that's a great point. We have no leverage whatsoever as a government, and it has to do with that $400 billion 25-year trade agreement that the Chinese and the Iranian government did over the summer. Listen, the Chinese government gave the Iranian regime 400 billion reasons to completely ignore anything that President Biden and the United States of America wants to do. And at the end of the day, we're begging the Iranian regime right now to come back to the negotiating table, while people like Robert Malley, who is the President Biden's U.S. Special Envoy to Iran, he's already announced that President Biden's willing to lift every single economic sanction on the terrorist regime in Tehran. And we just can't do that. We can't be lifting sanctions on the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. We've got to get tough. President Trump understood what peace through strength meant. Unfortunately, President Biden doesn't really understand what peace through strength means. And that's why you're seeing situations like the Iraqi prime minister surviving an assassination attempt over the weekend, because this is what Iran does. They are a malign entity that seeks to destroy the region, push their version of Islam all throughout the world. And all while they're doing this, Joe, it's death to America, it's death to Israel, and they just haven't changed their tune once in over 40 years. So it really is incumbent on this president to get tough.
I'm glad you bring this up, right? Because we have to try to put this threat matrix, by the way, in context, right? So you have, even if you turn our eyes to our own hemisphere, the assassination of the president of Haiti. The United States effectively has done nothing, even while the co-conspirators allegedly were living in Florida. You've got the assassination attempt, it appears, on the prime minister of Iraq, right? So you end up having all of these threats where it seems apparent that our enemies have been emboldened. And to your point, that's before we get to the fact that you have China propping up Iran and their nuclear ambitions while China engages in the largest nuclear buildup we have seen since the Cold War. It seems as if all the pieces are being aligned for America to be dead to rights in the eyes of our enemy, and we're effectively sitting there like sitting ducks while this administration pretends that it's just friendly competition on the global stage.
Joe, we're not just sitting ducks. I mean, the world's laughing at us, and they see the way that President Biden is dealing with foreign policy, and they're laughing at us. They're ignoring us. We have lost our seat at the table of being the most powerful country in the world. There was a vacuum that was filled when President Trump, a vacuum that was created, I should say, when President Trump left office. And you know who filled that, to your point? The Chinese government. They have filled that vacuum, not just in the Middle East, but all throughout the world. And we need to continue to keep the pressure on regimes like in Tehran, like in Beijing. These are countries that, Joe, they don't share our values. They don't respect our values. And they don't wish good for the American people. So it really is time. It's high time, Joe, for President Biden and everyone in his administration to really start getting tough on these bad actors around the world before it's too late.
Absolutely. When you have President Trump leaving office with those Abraham Accords in place to make sure we had a coalition of the willing in the region. Now you fast forward, that coalition has been undermined. You have Iran effectively working hand in hand with China. What happens, in your opinion, last thought here, if we allow Iran to get back on track to being able to not power their nation, but have capabilities to destroy nations, which anyone who has a clear eyes and a full heart understands is their true ambition with this nuclear program?
You just said the words, Joe, true ambition. The Iranian regime, they've been telling us from day one, since they took power in 1979, what they would do if they ever were to obtain a nuclear weapon. So we know what they're going to do. They're going to send those warheads into Israel. They're going to try and hit American assets and allies in the region. And this is who the Iranian regime is. And it's very important. Let me just make this last point for your viewers. We've got to draw a line in the sand between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime, death to America, murdering, oppressing, censoring their own people. Meanwhile, the Iranian people seek liberty. They love America. They love our values. They stand with us. They don't stand with their terrorist regime. So we've got to do everything that we can to support the Iranian people in their quest for liberty, in their quest for freedom. Again, to put it back on President Biden and his current administration, they've got to get tough. They've got to stop engaging in diplomacy, Joe, with the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. We know what the result's going to be. Diplomacy with terrorists is never going to work. It's not going to change this time around.
I think that's an excellent point because, again, our quibble is not with the Chinese people. It's not with the Iranian people. We know they seek freedom, their freedom being extinguished at home by those tyrannical governments. And the irony is the best thing that we can do to help those people is to model freedom for the world. And you see right now with the oppressive tactics we have here at home, from the mandates to the businesses, it's been a disaster. Brian, as always, thank you so much for joining us. God bless. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Joe. Take care.
All right.